Lyding understands the challenges of reaching all students, which is why she completed her doctoral work in purposefully planned movement. She assisted teachers in adding movement to their classroom instruction, which resulted in increased student engagement, enjoyment, and learning. Dr. Lyding has published several articles on movement, and she is the Dean of the School of Education at Arizona Christian University. She enjoys continuing her research and sharing her expertise with pre-service teachers and conducting professional development workshops. Okay, I thought somebody else came in. Dr. Lyding has a doctorate degree in leadership and innovation in teaching and a master's degree in elementary education. So the floor is yours, Dr. Lyding.
All right. Well, I kind of came through, I tell people that I came through the brain research part of this from the back door. I was a teacher, as I said, special education teacher, reading specialist, and I had kids who came to me and they could not sit still. And I said, oh my gosh. And I tell teachers sometimes, these are the kids that you might space around your classroom. And I brought them all right together because they were all in my classroom together. And I said, I've got to figure out how to use their bodies for them to learn. And so it really started, my using movement really started in teaching reading and how you teach kids how to read. And we made syllables and we made short vowels and long vowels and all of that kind of stuff. And then I would see my students go into their gen ed classroom, and I worked in the gen ed classroom as well. And I would notice that they were not paying attention, and I knew it was content that they could handle, but they were checked out. So that's when I decided to do my research in how do you use movement to learn. So I asked the teachers at my school if they would be willing to do the research with me, and they agreed because they were my friends. And so they said, yeah, we'll do that. Like, movement's good. Yeah, I think it's good. But we did something where we worked together. I taught them a bunch of strategies. We worked together and they created lessons, and then they and then one person went and taught it. And then we went in the classroom and we watched what the other students did, how the students responded to the lesson that this teacher that we created as a group. And then we'd get back and we would say, okay, so this worked and this didn't work, and we would adjust a lesson. So the teachers, after the first lesson, they said, oh my gosh, we got back together and they're like, wow, did you see so-and-so? Did you see so-and-so? Because the students that they knew had trouble sitting still were really engaged. And so that was kind of a really fun thing for them to see. And that's when I really dug into it and really found out why it's so effective. I didn't know why, I just knew I needed to do it. So I want you to think about yourself. Have you ever missed a piece of information in a meeting because you were daydreaming? Has that ever happened to you? You can raise your hand. Okay. Totally happened to me. Like, they're like, oh, do this. And I'm like, what are we doing again? Okay, that's our kids sometimes. You've ever fallen asleep or almost fallen asleep when you watched a movie? Yeah. I told them today at the session that my husband will often say, you probably haven't seen that whole movie. I've seen it, but you probably haven't, which is true. Have you ever gotten antsy while listening to a lecture or a message of some sort? Have you ever remembered something suddenly after you took a walk? Have you ever had a great idea after getting up and doing something active, like going for a walk or doing exercise or something like that? So think about that. What does that make you think about sitting? And what does it make you think about moving around? So if we as adults have trouble sitting, then we need to think about our kids and how, it's harder for them to sit. And the same with moving around. If we know that we are more effective after we move around. So let's think about kids. What percentage, put it in the chat, what percentage of the time do you think your child spends sitting during the day? What do we have in the chat? Do we have some suggestions on that? 70, 80. So research says that on average, primary school children spend 65% of their waking hours sitting, and secondary ed students spend 71% of their waking hours sitting. So that's a lot of time, and they did it with monitors on their wrists. And they wore it for like 7 days, and that's how they did it. So the question is, what difference does that make, right? So, I mean, who cares, right? Well, if we just look at simple things like health, the CDC, children ages 3 to 5, they should be physically active throughout the day for their growth. And we were talking this morning about babies and how they're talking about container babies, and you guys have probably heard that expression, but you know, babies are just staying in a container and moving to another place, and you can put it right in the car seat, you can put it right in the stroller, and they're not getting the same movement. And I know that my children who are in that field have said they're even changing what the norm is what they should be, when they should be reaching those stages. Older children, 6 to 17, needs 60 or more minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a day. And thinking about all those things, aerobic activity, muscle strengthening, bone strengthening, all of those things should be happening for the kids. And so in schools, you're not necessarily going to do all of those things, but some of those things can happen at home. Oops, sorry. So we need it for physical health. We know that. And this is a connection, because somebody had asked specifically about how much their kids should move. So this is a connection right off of the CDC website that kind of talks to you about what kids should be doing, and it allows you to kind of add the minutes and keep track of the minutes. So I just wanted to give you guys this connection, and it came right off the CDC website. So now we're going to talk about other reasons for movement. So there was a review of reviews of research that included data from over 258,000 participants. And they said that exercise has a positive effect on the general cognition, the general thinking, the memory, and executive functioning. So the attention, the planning, the self-control. That children and adolescents show greater improvements in memory and executive function. So this study, this review of reviews, was for all ages, from birth to older. And actually they say that it's heavy in the kids and heavy in the older population, and kind of not as heavy in the middle, but they're all in there. It said people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder experience the largest gains in executive function. And then even light or moderate exercise can meaningfully improve the brain function for everybody. So, but 81% of the children globally do not meet the recommended levels of physical activity. 81%. So that raises concerns about their brain development and their cognitive health. So we know that, sorry, I keep pushing these other things here and I'm not getting my main want. There we go. So cognitive health is the other reason. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the cognitive health, because that's where I have more knowledge. So any questions right now that you have, thoughts and questions and concerns? I'm going to go through some things about movement and learning at home. Okay, so I'm going to go through some things. What I did was, since it was for parents, I sent messages to all of my friends who have kids in school, and I said, what are some questions that you think you would have as a parent? And I took those questions and I narrowed them down to 10, and then we'll go through them because I kind of grouped them from there. So parents that I asked said, I never thought about it before. Well, that makes sense. I think that that's probably true. One asked, do you mean exercise or do you mean breaks? So do you mean actually physical exercise or breaks? So we'll talk about that. Can it be done with every subject? Can different ages do it together? Because if they have several kids at home. My child is not athletic or has a disability. Can you still do it in that situation? Is it backed by research? It sounds like a good idea, but how do I do it? How much room is needed? Can it be done inside? In the winter, these people lived in Ohio. Won't it make them wild? I don't have time. Which we know that that's a huge thing for everybody, right? So I'm going to answer these I never thought about it. I don't really have an answer for that, but I'm just going to say, let's think about it. So do you mean exercise or breaks? It really could be both. I think both are important. So it's not like we're going to talk about one or the other. We'll talk about both. Can it be done in every subject? Absolutely. Can different ages do it together? Absolutely. My child is not athletic or disability. That's not a problem. Is it backed by research? Yes, it is backed by research. Sounds like a good idea, but how? That's what we're going to talk about. And how much room is needed? Can you do it inside? Yeah. We talked today about people who had really crowded classrooms and how things that they could do, but we'll talk a little more about that. Won't it make them wild? Doesn't have to. And I don't have time. It actually might save time because they might actually have more people who, kids who can do more. Here's some research. When you move, you stimulate nerve cells that we use to think with. And when you stimulate those nerve cells, it gets them ready to do stuff. So they're ready to start learning just by movement. Half of the brain's neurons are in the cerebellum, which is right back here in the back of the head. And the cerebellum is involved in both physical coordination and thought coordination. So learning and movement happen in the same part of the brain. The same place. When students get up and move, their concentration and attention span improve. A study showed that even the tiniest, barely measurable amount of physical activity improves brain function. So even one of the things we talked about today was just like putting your arms up in the air, arm circles, all those things. When you engage in physical activity, it increases the blood flow and the oxygenation to the brain, and it boosts neural connectivity and stimulates nerve cell growth in the hippocampus, the center of learning and memory. So exercise actually changes the structure of our brains. So it's pretty important to do. So let's look at the questions. Exercise or breaks. So research shows that the intensity of movement is not what's important. So both movement breaks or exercise are going to help. If your child's not athletic, because intensity doesn't matter, the movement can be adjusted to their capabilities, what they can do. How much room is needed? Enough room to stand or just move. And I don't have time. Research even says a study, there's 10 to 20 seconds can be enough. Now, probably you should do more, but it can be enough. So here's where it talks about it. There was a study that was done on 41 healthy 10 to 15-year-old children in Japan. And they found that 10 to 20 seconds of simple movements like upward stretch, elbow circles, trunk twists, single leg balance significantly increased the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, right at the front of the brain where they're doing all of their decision making, compared to when they were just resting. 10 to 20 seconds. So that's not much time that you need to have. So can it be done in every subject, and can different ages do together? Yes. So one way to do that is just moving. So when we talked about a break, you just move, that's it. Another way is to connect it to the subject, and we'll practice some of that in a little bit. In both situations, we can just adjust for age. When we do it with the subject, we're going to have to do maybe a slightly different topic. And if they need to move, they may move slightly differently. Won't it make them wild? You got to set the expectations, but if you set the expectations, just like anything you do with your kids, right? You know, they know what the rules are. This is what the expectations are. And you don't have to worry about it. So anyway, here's a couple more statements of research. If you engage in aerobic activities, it increases the heart rate and increases the blood flow, and increased blood flow creates enriched setting for mental activities. So you're getting the brain all prepared and ready for that information, and it's ready to act on it and to remember it. And they also have been shown to positively impact the academic performance, and it can be effective. It can be an effective intervention for behavioral impulses. So if you have kids that have trouble with sitting still, this can help them use that energy, and then they can pull back in and sit still when they need to sit still. But they actually, it gets their brain ready, and really their movement is their body's own way of trying to get it ready. So if you can kind of help direct that, then it'll be even easier for you. Okay, sounds like a good idea, but how do we do it? We're going to talk about some options. One is taking a break, which we mentioned before. 2 is moving while learning. 3 is using gestures effectively. And 4 is full body engagement. Some people refer to it as like total physical response. So we're going to kind of go through these, and you guys are going to get to participate. with me. So taking a break. So I don't know if you've heard of, it's called the Pomodoro method, or Pomodoro technique, but basically all it is setting a timer. Who knew it had a fancy name, but it does. But it's Pomodoro because timers used to look like this, right? They used to look like a tomato, and a student can watch the timer go off. So get a timer any timer that your child can watch, and let them see that it's counting down, because it'll help them know. And create a list. So that's the first thing you do. Then create a list of movement breaks. A deck of cards can be used, and it'll help make it random. We'll talk about that. Things they might want to do: lunges, push-ups, jumps, steps, high knees, all kinds of things that they can do. I also have this cool, let's see if I can get it to show up here. Yeah, this cool, yeah, we can't really see it. I might have to take my background off and show it to you a little bit later. It's got, what it is it's a dice that has 12 sides. And Barbara, do you remember what a 12-sided dice is called? Yeah, you're muted right now.
No, I don't remember.
It was like, it was a multi-syllabic word. Oh, you can kind of see it right now. So, and there's different animals on it. There's an alligator who crawls, a horse who gallops, an ant, it says march. So this is something that they can roll. I got this off Amazon. But they can roll it, and that can be the activity that they do. It's just kind of a fun, random way for them to find an activity. So set a timer that works for your students. So your child. So I'm thinking, if whether you want to use this because they want to spend some time and they're allowed to have some time on some sort of a device, that's fine. Or when they're doing homework, you can set it for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes if they're a little bit older. But I wouldn't set it for very long. And then when the timer goes off, your child gets to pick the activity that they're going to do. So here is one activity that we did today, and I'm going to let you guys do it now. Okay, so I have cards. These are huge cards. They are as big as they look. And what I do with students is we'll just take these cards and we pick a card, and we're going to do something, some sort of exercise based on the cards. So you can get a deck of cards. You might want to remove the face cards because they're kind of hard to number. So let's just say, if we do diamonds, clubs, hearts, and spades, what are some activities that you think you'd like to do? So one thing that I've usually done is hearts for jumping jacks, because that's always good for your heart, right? We can kind of do, I don't know. I've got diamonds next. Let's say toe touches for diamonds. You guys are gonna have to remind me what we said.
Squats.
Squats for spades.
Lunges.
And lunges for clubs. Okay, so I'm gonna just pull, because I can't really figure out a way to get you guys do it. So I've got these cards right here. I'm gonna pull one out. It is the ace of clubs. So that's ones. We're gonna count by ones. So that's pretty easy. When we did six, we had to count by sevens. But okay, we had to count by sixes and sevens, I think it was, right, Barbara?
Yes, sevens.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're gonna do lunges with this. So we'd stand up and we're gonna do lunges, and we're gonna count at the same time, but we're just gonna count by one. So you guys can stand up. I'm gonna stand up.
Okay, you guys with the cameras off, come on, let's do it.
Yeah, okay, so you're gonna take it, and we're just gonna count by one, so you guys can count out loud.
Nobody's coming.
And we're gonna count to 10. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so they can choose the movements. You can do that. It makes it random. It's kind of a fun thing to do. You're gonna have to adjust it for age, because like today we're counting by sixes. So, for young kids, you may just do ones and twos and tens. So they count by, and I always count 10 of them. So it's, ones, it goes to 10, twos are gonna go to 20, tens will go to 100, but 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. But it gives them a chance to get up and do that. So when the timer goes off, they choose a card, and then everybody does that movement for the number of times it's there. That's my next slide. Let's practice. We did it. So this is this is good. I'm glad I have this picture here. This is what I was trying to show you. This is a fun little dice that I roll. And actually, I think it's kind of fun. My boss, whenever he comes in, he rolls it before he leaves, and he leaves doing whatever it is that comes up. Which is pretty funny, especially, you know, at a university, you don't expect to see as much of that kind of stuff. But move like an animal. That's another idea. Just get something like this and have them choose an animal or let them roll the dice. Let your child choose it. They can choose what they want to do. You can just give them a break. If that's another thing you can do. Have them touch maybe 6 things that are blue or 5 things that are white, or, you know, 2 things that are orange or whatever, and they can get up and they can do it for you, and you can do it for them. But just that idea of getting up and looking and trying to go and touch as many as they can. You can put on music and dance. You can time them running laps or sprints, like they can go outside and you can just like, they can keep track of that, time of that, or you can just even go get the mail or have them get the mail, depending on what your home situation is like, or your neighborhood is like. So those are just some simple little break ideas. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can make it fun. You can do some things that are a little bit different. Okay, so our next idea is, you know, thinking about moving while learning. And there are some benefits to doing this, which will, I'll show you the research on that. But I guess here's the same thing with the cards. I actually, on the other one, I was just going to have you do a movement, but I got ahead of myself. When you're doing the jumping jacks and the hearts, when you're doing something cognitive at the same time that you're doing some sort of an exercise, it increases their retention of the information. So we just did the cards, and I want you to think about, we did it by counting by cards, but what else do you think you could do with cards? Let's see if you guys have any ideas on what you could do if you drew the cards.
You can maybe draw the card, have someone draw the cards and whatever number they have after you've described what the movement should be, they'd have to do that many reps.
They have to do that many reps. Yeah, they could just do that many reps. Excellent idea. Any other thoughts? If they're studying the Constitution and they pulled a 2, maybe they could tell you 2 amendments that are in the Constitution, or, you know, or they could choose 2 spelling words to spell for you while they're doing the movement. Or they could break a vocabulary word into syllables while doing the movement, or while doing the movement that's tied to it. So there's lots of different fun ways for them to do it, but the idea is just to get them moving and thinking about that at the same time. So this is the study that I was talking about. So it shows that if you have both movement and a higher cognitive load, that increases the brain activity, and it really had a lot more blood flow in those ranges, which helps kids retain, or helps them retain the information. And then also just that using the brain during and after exercise kind of triggers enhanced neuron survival. So just really helps improve your brain and strengthen your brain. So here's another one that we're going to do together. So we're going to do, we have a choice of squats, lunges, phonemes. We can do push-ups. What would you like to do? And then I'll tell you how we're going to do it.
Definitely not push-ups, I'm just saying.
Well, and you can do push-ups on the edge of a table.
Yeah.
And you
Okay,
can do dips on the edge of a table, which that's totally fine. Yeah. Okay. Let's do the word school. Okay. That's a good one. How many sounds do you hear in school? Ooh, oh. 4 sounds?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay, so we're gonna squat down really low. I'm just pushing my chair back here. Squat down really low, and you're gonna go ooh, oh. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off the screen, but ooh, oh, and then you stand all the way up, and then you can blend it and say school. Now, school's a hard one for me to try and substitute. I'm trying, oh, I know. Let's say school, but let's change the ooh to a t. So now we've got ooh, scoot. So just that just moving up just a little bit. Same thing when you do push-ups, you just go ooh, oh, and then you blend it and go school. So when you can have that little bit of break, so you can do it spelling words, you can do it again, vocabulary, doing it with vocabulary. If you take a word like independence and you break it into each syllable and they start practicing independence, they'll enunciate it better, they'll pronounce it better, instead of lots of times kids kind of like blur that middle section if they're not practicing that. So this kind of is a fun way to practice, and you could do it with vocabulary, and then you could talk about what that vocabulary word means, and move on to a different one, and they can choose whether they do squats or they do lunges or they do push-ups. What I would do with my students is I actually wrote those ideas down, and then we would check them. So we're not doing push-ups all the time. So that way you don't get quite so sore, because you actually can get sore when you're doing that. Okay. So we gave that a try. So now we're going to talk about gestures and how to use gestures effectively. So gestures, I'm going to say, by the way, this cutie right here, this is my granddaughter. She's thinking and she's putting her hand on her nose while she thinks. But gestures are incredibly effective, and there's some really strong research as to why they're so effective. But I'm just going to go like this, and I want you to say the word. So unmute yourself and say, you feel free to do the motions with me and say the words if you can think of them. So we're going to go like this. Does anyone know what that is?
Incy Wincy Spider.
Itsy Bitsy Spider, yeah. So I went to a conference with my husband in California, and it was a businessman's conference, right? They were all business people. And I was in the middle of doing my dissertation during that time, and everybody had to give a speech. And so, in my speech, it's like, okay, I'm going to just do a part of my research. So I started my speech off doing this, and I asked them to join me. And I asked how many people knew it. All but one raised their hand, and they knew it was Itsy Bitsy Spider. All but one. Business people, not teachers, who might use it more often. And so that one person, I went like this. Oh, you can't see, but. So I did YMCA. Yep. YMCA. And she had just moved to the United States, and she was like, oh yeah, that's YMCA. But I asked them, how long's it been since you've done Itsy Bitsy Spider? And it'd been a really long time for most of them, but they knew it because it was so embedded. Once they did the movements, it was so embedded in what they were doing. So we're going to talk about why those movements, for that one especially, is so strong. But what happens is that when you use gestures, it offloads the working memory, and it allows you to learn, more space to learn and better space to retain the information. They are incredibly helpful for students. So when you use gestures, there we go. Oh, wait, now it all came. Okay. Well, so what we really found when we used gestures, and these were things that helped us really get our biggest bang for our buck, is what I like to say. But the movement needs to connect to the meaning. So when we do Itsy Bitsy Spider, you can see that spider climbing up. You can see the rain coming down. It's connecting to the meaning of it. You totally get it. If you do something like sounds like when you're doing charades or something like that, that's not going to give the students or your children as much retention. But if it connects to the meaning, and they can tell you, oh, this connects to the meaning because I can see the spider climbing up the water spout, and I can see the rain coming down. That's what helps them remember. So anytime you do gestures with your child, make sure that you have them connect what they're doing to the meaning of it. And that they should be able to tell you what it is and explain what the meaning is. And then if you do something and you connect and you want to help with the articulation, do a little movement for each part of the syllable. So like on the page before this, we have the little boy who's doing hypothesis. Hypothesis is one of the things that we did with our second graders when I did my research, and they went like this. So they went hypothesis. So it wasn't a lot of movement, but they came up with this gesture because it's thinking about what's going to happen in that experiment. And then they moved it like this to give that little bit to help them remember those syllables and to help to pronounce it better. So those are important things to think about when you're having your child do it. And then try to remember, if you're helping your child learn vocabulary that way, try to remember to do the gesture when you tell them about it. So that if you do the gesture every time, pretty soon you can go like this, and they're going to be like, oh, that's a hypothesis. My hypothesis for this is whatever. So, or what's your for this situation? My hypothesis for this situation. So they start making that connection, and because it makes sense to them. So so it really offloads the working memory. It greatly increases retention. I'm going to tell you one more story about hypothesis. I went back to the school that I did my research at 3 years later, and those second grade students were in fifth grade. One of the teachers that had been in our group was now a teacher coach, and she told me that she went into the fifth grade classroom and they were talking about hypothesis, and she saw her former students go like this. None of the other students, but her former students totally remembered hypothesis and went like this. So that was 3 years later. Used to be that teachers would complain, you never taught that to them. Well, they didn't remember it, but they remembered this because it made sense to them and it connected. And these were my nieces who are adults now. But they did this on humiliation. So let's just play this.
Humiliation. Humiliation means being embarrassed. So I have an idea. We put our hands in front of our face because we were embarrassed. Because when you are embarrassed, you don't want to be in front of people because it's becoming you know embarrassing. And it's hard to pronounce, so we did it for every syllable. You could go like this 5 times. Very next, we are humiliated. That's the word. We try to hide our faces.
So you can kind of see, how they thought that this was they came up with this themselves. And that was all their idea, but you can see the connections because I had told them the important things to remember. I told them it was important to connect to the concept and what the word meant and to be able to explain it. And so they did that. I mean, they were good, they were sharp kids, but they did that pretty quickly, and that was all their idea. So it's pretty fun to see kids come up with it. When we did our research and we did some of that, we in the classroom, so if you're dealing with kids in the classroom, we had an idea of something that we could be used for each term, but we wanted the kids to take ownership of it. So we taught the vocabulary, and then after they knew what the vocabulary was, then they worked together, the students worked together to come up with a gesture that represented that vocabulary. And they did it all themselves. They were very successful. We actually didn't have to use any of our ideas. And this was second and third graders that we were working with. They were able to think of things. Sometimes it might take a little bit for them to get to that point and to start thinking about it. They loved it. And I used the gestures with my college students. And I was going to be gone one day when I was giving them an exam, and I had somebody else coming in to give the exam. And they asked me, and this was my secondary ed college students. So these are people who are teaching secondary ed. And they said, will you tell the teacher that we might be doing movements when we're taking our test? And I was like, yeah, sure. She'll think it's great, because they were using some of the movements to help them remember the concepts that I was trying to teach them. But they knew they needed it, and they just wanted to make sure that people knew what was going on. So kind of fun to see that. So in students, I think it's important to know that they actually start gesturing sometimes before they can explain the full concept. So if you watch carefully, you can kind of see how close they are to understanding something, especially like if you're looking at math problems, they might be using their fingers and starting to gesture a little bit. So that's a good thing to keep an eye on to help you see where students see where kids are at. Okay, I've been talking for a really long time. Any questions at this point?
I would kind of ask how
Yeah.
large the movements have to be. It seems like you're suggesting like really quite small. I mean, gestures are small, right?
Yeah, no, they can be small or they can be big. It doesn't matter. You know, whatever makes sense to them. Yeah, and we've had them do it both ways. So gestures are usually more just your body and your arms. But yeah, any size. Here's just a little more information about gestures. Gestures, perfect storm in the sense that it helps you focus your thoughts. It helps you remember information that you gestured. It helps lighten your cognitive load. It externalizes the thoughts, brings them out, it brings your body into the thinking. It brings a second modality using your hands or your arms or whatever. And it lets you represent your thinking. So using your hands to kind of show what you're thinking. It promotes abstraction and it fills in gaps. So that's what the golden medal has done a lot of research and on gestures. I used them way back when I did mine in 2012. And this is a more recent study that they did. Okay, so what you can do with your kids if they're having trouble is you can ask them, try to use your hands. And maybe if you use your hands when you're trying to explain it, maybe it'll help me understand what you're asking. But that concept, using their hands, can help them think through that process. So that's a way that you can help them get to that next level. I mean, and what do we do? How often do, I mean, I'm doing it right here, right now. How often do we use our hands when we're talking? So I don't have it on here, but I think that an interesting fact is that people who are born blind gesture. So if you think about that, that kind of tells you a little bit about what it's doing for your body. Nobody told them to gesture. They're not seeing anyone gesture. They just intuitively are doing it. So that tells me a lot about what it's doing for your brain. So it's a natural thing to do. So it's an easy, natural way to really help increase retention of things. Okay. So then the last idea is just full body engagement while learning and like total physical response. So thinking about, put on some music, have your child freeze, dance and then freeze, and they can they can freeze like something in the story that they're reading, so I'm going to be. And if they're out there, they're dancing, they're enjoying themselves, and then they freeze and they say, oh, I talked about Goldilocks today. I'm Goldilocks, just pulling those covers up really close on my neck. So just something that connects with them. But the dancing and being crazy just gets that energy out of them, gets the blood flowing, and then they can bring them back to that content and they can think about that. But they can walk out a math problem, actually take steps, to add the math problem. I'm going to take 2 steps forward, and then we're going to add 3 more steps, and they can see that. And I read a research study very recently that talked about how people, when they move to the right, it's easier for them to add. And when they move to the left, it's easier for them to subtract. I have not tried that with anyone. I just read it last week. But I thought it was really interesting. It also said if you're going, they can add better if they're going up an elevator, and they can subtract better if they're going down an elevator. And I was like, that is just one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. But they had some research to back it, and I haven't looked at the research yet, but I thought it's kind of interesting. I would like to just throw it out there and try it and tell someone, hey, can you do some addition for me, and watch what they do and see if they go to the right or they go to the left, but it's something to think about, that it just instinctively, if that's what you do. So, but walking out a math problem is definitely something that can be done and would be helpful. And that's using your whole body to do that. Using their body to spell a spelling word. I mean, that's just like, we're just going to make those letters and they can just spell the spelling word using their body. And kids love to do that kind of thing. It's fun and it's creative, but it's going to help them with remembering. Here are some other things, acting out a system in the body. So this would be something that's more like for a classroom, or you could have it in your house where they're walking through. And if it's the circulatory system, where the blood cells change, where the heart, it goes in the heart and comes out of the heart, and some of those kinds of things. You can create a historical timeline. Again, if you just have your child, then you can actually just put a rope on the floor and they can go from spot to spot and they can say, here, this is what happens at this event. And then 50 years later, this is what happened. But they can kind of walk down and walk out and talk about what happened in history. Create a tableau. I love to do this with students where they freeze like a picture in the book, and then I come and tap them on the shoulder, and then they come alive and tell me what they're doing at the time. If you do little kids, they'll say, I'm pretending to be. But if you do older kids, they can say, I am angry because, or, I am, sad because, whatever. They can actually put themselves in that place. It seems to be around 3rd grade, I think, when they can make that transition. They're just too literal in 1st and 2nd grade. They have a harder time saying that, but at least they can say, I'm pretending to be the princess that, I don't know, slept on a pea. So, that's something like that. But freezing like that tableau and coming to life is a fun thing for them to do, but it's their whole body and they're totally involved in the story. Acting out an event in history. Somebody had asked a question about older students. I actually had a student teacher who did this, where I went in to observe him, and he had all the desks down, and the kids were on both sides, hiding behind their desks, and they had wadded up pieces of paper, and they were throwing the paper across to each other and trying to hit each other. And then people tried to go over and to the other side without getting hit. And then they sat down and they wrote about what it was like to be in the middle of the warfare and what happened in their life. They wrote their parents a story. So they actually were physically acting it out. And then they're like, man, this is what it felt like. This is what it could have been like if it was really bullets, if it was really a war. So that kind of acting out an event can be incredibly powerful for students. Create a hundreds chart or a number line. So I actually had a rug, but before I had a rug that I could use for the hundreds chart, I just used a shower curtain, and you could use a tablecloth. Today I use tablecloths from the dollar store, where you can actually just put them down on the floor and you can draw out a hundreds chart, and that can help them count, what it is. That can help them count by different numbers, like sevens, like we were doing, or it can also help them do addition and subtraction, and just have that concept. They can walk out those math problems on the floor. Creating compound and complex sentences where somebody is independent clause and someone's a dependent clause, and they're walking around and they have to connect up with each other and try and make a complex sentence, a compound sentence, or in complex sentences, depending on what they both are, to help them just understand that concept of by yourself you can't. And I would have my dependent clauses walk crooked because they can't stand by themselves, but the independent clauses can totally stand by themselves. But if the dependent clauses can be next to the independent clauses, then they can make a sentence, and they just have to know whether they need to put the comma in between or they don't need to put the comma in between, depending on where it goes in the sentence. But it's kind of a fun way to deal with something that can be a kind of a weird concept, a really abstract concept. So story reenactment, math problem reenactment, creating a talk show, even just, interviewing a famous person. If you have more than one child, you could do something like that. Okay, so here's my thing. You can do this with your kids. But this is what I did today. I used with tablecloths that I had cut up the circle one I just got, and then a square one and triangles. So the triangle, just asking, this is something you can ask your kids after they're doing their homework. What's one point you learned? Or with triangles, I like to say, what are 3 points that you learned? There's 3 points on a triangle. So when you're all done with your homework today, I want you to tell me 3 points that you learned. And I want you to tell me maybe something that squares with what you already know, or something that you already knew that you learned about today. Or what's a question you still have? So doing those 3 things can kind of help them connect. It gives you an idea of what they learned in their homework, what they learned in school, gives them a chance to pull that information up again, to retrieve it, to practice it. And you can, like I did it with tablecloths, you can put them on the floor. If you do it at home, you might be able to save those plastic tablecloths. If you do it in the classroom, I actually bought some PVC pipe and made triangles and squares with PVC pipe. And then I just used hula hoops for the circles. And then that way they could actually go step on that. So you can kind of decide how you want to do that. At home, you could just use the tablecloths and it would be certainly sufficient. But if you have a class of 20 kids, they're not going to last. But anyway, that's just kind of it. So they can go to that spot and kind of tell you those things. So what do you think is one thing that we talked about that you can try this school year with your kids?
So I'll go. I actually teach at the college level, so it's tough to come up with ways to get the older students involved, but I think it's just as important,
It
absolutely.
is.
And listening to your talk encourages me to, I love to have them interact with each other, but I don't think I just want to say, go sit with a partner somewhere else. It might be more like take a walk with the partner and then come back and share your ideas.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really good thing to do in the college. And some of the things that we did today, that I do all the time in college is some of the information I shared with people by putting them on, I just put it on 8.5 by 11, like those research statements, and put them around the classroom, and they pair up and they go and they read those statements, talk about them, and then come back, and then we can have a discussion about it. So it's a way to give them some information and they're walking around while they're doing it. We also talked about using, just giving them information and having them sort it out. Like I had a whole bunch of statements on research and I asked them to put them in categories at their tables. In my classroom, I will often use hula hoops, but I have them put them in categories and think about them. These are all just research statements on movement, because I wanted them to read those statements. And I know that if I gave my college students a list of paper with all of those statements, they're not reading them all. Everyone there today admitted they would not read them all.
Yep.
But they read them all more than once today because they wanted to figure out what went where, what worked. And so that's a good way to help them read what it is you want them to read and process it. And then we went another step, and I would never do all of this at the same time, but today, because I wanted to just do a bunch of things, then they prioritized, and they got in smaller groups and said, this is the order I would put them in. And then they had to combine and debate and say why this one was more important. So those are kind of ways that I've used with college students, where they're getting up and they're interacting. They have a purpose, something that they need to do, and they buy into it then. And they're pretty competitive. So they want their statement to win just because it's their statement. But they have to justify it.
That's
Anybody
great.
else have any thoughts? If you have any questions for me, feel free to email me. Let me know where it's coming from, just because put it in the subject line, because otherwise I might delete it too fast. Especially now with some of the spam that we're getting. But these are all, I had my students do this one year. I make bookmarks every year for the education department, and I had them send me hearts with somebody else's hand. So I like to use those as background. But that's what I have for you guys.